Hello and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we discuss matters of international, national, and local importance in a calm, reasoned, and balanced way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
A couple of minutes late as we were wrestling with a few technical gremlins, but the sun is in the sky. Um, it's all going on in the world, and today we've done a viewer's choice, haven't we?
We kind of took a little bit of a list and saw what things were going on, and there were lots of things that were happening. The things that our audience wanted us to talk about was the situation in Iran with Israel attacking the nuclear facilities in Iran. They've obviously, since we put out that poll, they've now been joined in that fray by the United States. Another thing was the welfare reform bill, and the government's U-turn on whether or not to have another grooming gangs inquiry to try and understand kind of what's gone wrong in that situation. So those are the big things that we're going to kind of hip in topic. So it's worth just mentioning in passing the things that were kind of also rans that didn't kind of make it to the list.
Yeah, I mean it's been a busy couple of weeks for news, so yeah, just the things that didn't quite make it, but we might get to a couple of them at the end if we fly through the first three.
Yeah, indeed. But by all means, do join in on the fray on the comments. Let us know what you think, and even if you can send us a Facebook message, a voice recording, we might even try to make that work. But to be fair, considering how the tech's gone this evening, maybe that's probably a push too far. So quite a few things that have been happening. I'm just going to run through them quickly and kind of know in no particular order. So on June the 2nd, the Strategic Defence Review was published by the UK government, in which that talked about spending 2.5% of GDP by 2027 and aiming to get to 3%, building more munitions factories, submarines, and increasing cyber capabilities. An infrastructure spending pledge was also announced. That was about a 10-year, £725 billion infrastructure plan, windfall tax negotiations, and a possible North Sea oil sector renationalisation, an industry strategy and skills boost, 275 million expanding technical training by 2029 and 380 million into the creative industries. So all good, juicy investment things. The assisted dying debate was on June the 20th. So that kind of passed that initial stage in the Commons, and we'll now go to the Lords, but that passed with 314 for and 291 against after some impassioned and detailed debates.
Yeah, worth mentioning there. It is a topic that we wanted to cover on the podcast. We did have a for and against position person. One of those has withdrawn. So if you hold strong views against the assistive dying bill, then please don't hesitate to get in contact. Obviously, it is a very emotional subject, so we'd be looking for a respectful Pompey Politics podcast style discussions. But if you would like to make the case against the assisted dying bill, please get in contact with us through all the usual mediums, and we will. I mean, I don't mean like talk to the dead, but yeah, get in touch with us, and we will happily see if we can organise that show.
Or just email us studio@pppodcast.uk. That's studio@pppodcast.uk. And then the other thing was, of course, the vote about the decriminalisation of abortion. So on June 17th. So although it still needs to pass House of Lords and House of Commons further readings to receive royal assent, it ends the criminal penalties for self-managed abortions in England and Wales that are beyond the 24-week limit that's currently in place. That's on the back of several women that had been actually prosecuted by the police for trying to take a attempting an abortion after those periods. So yeah, really kind of meaty subjects. It was hard to kind of pick the ones. So thankfully, we didn't have to pick the ones that we were going to talk about because our audience kind of did that for us. So thanks, audience. So which one should we take first, Ian?
Shall we start in the Middle East? I guess that's probably the biggest ticket item on the global scale.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, so shall I give a quick rundown of kind of what's happened so far,
give us a
just to
quick
kind of
overview of
build the picture.
situation.
So so June 13th wasn't the IDF deployed 200 aircraft in multiple waves to attack 100 Iranian sites, including nuclear, military, and command and control, missile production sites, nuclear research centers, and heavy water reactors. Reports placed for fatalities over 200, with over 100,000 civilians fleeing Tehran to the north of the country. Iran, in retaliation, launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, hitting military, residential, and hospital areas, and injuring around 200 Israeli civilians. These were the notes that I made the other day. Obviously, this is kind of an ongoing, very fluid thing.
Yeah.
And since I did my notes, of course, the Americans had said that they were, President Trump had said that he was going to he actually gave quite a feisty rebuke to a reporter that had asked him basically whether he was going to commit the Americans' military might to helping the Israelis bomb those facilities in Iran, and he pretty much ridiculed her for the suggestion that he would basically share with the mass media what those plans were ahead of those kind of military activities. To be fair, I guess she was just the reporter concerned just wasn't in the right WhatsApp group. But the Americans did indeed contribute using their bunker buster bombs, or the massive ordnance penetrator bombs, as apparently they're called, with 125 aircraft, 7 of which are B-2 stealth bombers, dropping 14 of the massive ordnance penetrator bombs. And it's worth noting that not just did the American intelligence agency only a couple of weeks ago, indeed, the head of the American intelligence agency state that they didn't have any intelligence that said that the Iranians were actually progressing to develop the bomb, but the IAEA chief Director General Rafael Grossi had also said that there wasn't any evidence that they were seeking to enrich. So the conflicting reports, Trump, the Israelis are saying that there is evidence that the Iranians were enriching more uranium than they needed for civilian uses, and well, that's the situation to go. So, what are your thoughts so far? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, audience.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, it's a complex arrangement, as everything always is with the Middle East. And obviously, I don't think you can look at the action against Iran in isolation with kind of everything that's happened in and around Israel since kind of October the 7th. So there is this situation where Iran does not hide the fact that it provides an awful lot of finances to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Houthis in Yemen, which are considered terrorist organizations by most Western governments. And again, as the old saying, isn't there, that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But if you look at the whole situation, Iran has been in that space for some years now. The Iranian people are ruled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, quite an extreme group of clerics. So it is that whole kind of dilemma of, if we want to be reductive and boils things down into, who are the goodies and who are the baddies in this conflict, which I know is reductive, but it's often the way things go. Iran are definitely not the goodies, but that said, it feels like there is a very strong echo of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. and the Gulf War that then followed that, to find there were no weapons of mass destruction. So
Where's Hans
yeah,
Blix when you need him, eh? Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that for me was the striking similarity. It kind of feels like, obviously we don't know what the intelligence is, but it does kind of feel like a conclusion has been arrived at, which isn't necessarily data led. Is possibly a polite way to put it, or maybe it is, and all of the other countries in the world that say that there isn't data that says that are completely wrong. I don't know. You don't. That's the trouble with this, is you're never going to see the data, and indeed, when governments start actually sharing their intelligence information, it's usually tarted up in such a way that it just presents the argument
yeah.
that they want it to make. So it's kind of like yeah. But it does have
Well,
kind of all the hallmarks of that. It just feels, if I'm honest, kind of my observation was, haven't Israel got enough going on at the minute that they kind of, what suddenly
well,
changed in the last week that meant that this needed to happen? Or
well, I think you might have hit the nail on the head, Simon, to be honest, which is that, if you look at this, if you look at where Israel is, and you look at, and I think we touched on it, and that, if you look at some of the factions of Hamas, if you look at Hezbollah, they are only able to do what they do because of the money that Iran provides for them, and resources and rockets, and the ordnance all comes from Iran. So I guess, if we look at this through the business lens, we've both worked in continuous improvement and, root cause analysis. And often the thing is, if you don't solve the root cause, you can treat as many of the symptoms as you like, but the problem won't go away. And this feels to me like as you say, whether the data justifies it or not, it feels to me like a concerted effort from Israel, and now being backed by America, to effectively look to generate a regime change in Iran, which I guess the hope would be that if more moderates were running Iran rather than the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, then that might choke off the supply of money, goods, and arms to those who are surrounding Israel currently, and would give them, quote unquote, less problems. It 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 looks like the logical kind of approach from, when I kind of try and take a step back.
I think, and I'll just say in answer, by the way, to Man of Glass, your comment, by the way, can we see comments in the chat? Yes, we can. So if you're commenting on YouTube or Facebook, we can indeed see your comments live. So we'll respond to them if we can. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just always struck by, there doesn't necessarily have to be a kind of a black and white and a binary kind of, this side is right to do this or this side is wrong to do this, or actually some of these things can also be true at the same time.
Yep.
Iran definitely of heavy involvement with supporting Hezbollah or Hamas and other kind of organizations in the region. They've got their I guess their kind of their political and their military and their financial kind of fingers in all of those pies. They're providing drones and rockets to Russia to use in Ukraine. So they're they're not exactly kind of sitting there peacefully minding their own business and
No.
Why are these people attacking us? But at the same time, it kind of just seems really strange that it happened kind of at this point, at the point where the situation in, let's not forget, obviously the horrific events of 7th of October, where Hamas launched their dreadful attack into Israel. But subsequent effective mass punishment of the people in Gaza doesn't seem to have kind of an end in sight, and that seems a thoroughly miserable situation. So why kind of, I don't know what's kind of suddenly changed that means that you pick another front in that fight and decide to kind of go after the quote unquote kind of parent or cousin kind of organization. Because Netanyahu's been going on about Iran being just about to develop the nuclear bomb for decades. Whereas Israel, of course, is a nuclearly armed country that doesn't admit that it's a nuclearly armed country. It maintains what's it called? Strategic ambiguity. It's a lovely phrase to choose, but
it's one I've deployed often in my life. I try and be strategically ambiguous a lot of the time. I was actually having this discussion online with a trusted old friend of ours, Sue. We were talking about, and we always have to tiptoe carefully around each other on this. And looking back October the 7th, I mean, Israel has a long and very unfortunate history of collective punishment. So when when you start digging into what motivated Hamas to cross the border and commit the atrocities that they did, there's this argument, well, the Palestinian people have been repressed by Israel for so long, and that there is a validity to that. But it was not a lone wolf act. It was an organized and orchestrated attack on Israel with the absolute sure and certain knowledge that Israel would react brutally, would react beyond the realms of what would be considered reasonable by most people, and would almost react without mercy. And if I look through that lens, then for me personally, I see the thread back to, well, who benefits from that? It's not the Palestinian people. It was never going to bring peace or a live and let live situation any closer. So the question is, well, who would benefit from that level of destabilization? And for me, I see those threads going back to Iran, who, let's be very clear, that there is a religious ideology that the leadership of Iran would 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 want to see Israel and its people scourged from the face of the earth. So I think there is a piece that almost, in terms of exploring that why now, I'm wondering whether Gaza is a war that can't be won. And I think Israel has pivoted to take a different approach to try and I don't think it gets us any closer to an end, but I think the deal is that Trump's suggestion of turning Gaza into a golf resort, that if we're that far off the wall, then what's happened in the last few days, does that seem more or less sane than turning Gaza into a golf resort? I'm not sure. Well, I think I am sure. I think it's still not great, but what else is there?
No, well, that's the thing, is that I think that none of the options are great. All of the options are kind of awful. I'm just kind of conscious that of three different observations. One is that it's very easy for different countries to manufacture a reason to conduct a preemptive strike.
Yes.
And if it was a different country that decided to launch a preemptive strike, if it was China or if it was Russia or if it was North Korea, would the debate in the West be entirely different? Of course it bloody would. At the same time, no one wants a nuclearly armed Iran.
No.
My other kind of consideration is that, look, none of this is the Palestinian people in Gaza, the Iranian people, and the Israeli citizens. They are not the ones that are making these decisions that are actually then they are paying the price for. And I don't know. I don't think anybody really honestly believes that you can bomb your way to peace.
Well,
But
war
if
has
you're
never
only
been
no,
war has
sorry.
never been settled on the battlefield, has it?
No, it always results in. There's that wonderful quote, isn't there, from Peter Capaldi's time at Doctor Who that we won't play for reasons of the BBC are quite ferocious at their copyright infringement. But yes, you do end up having to, because unless you believe, and you'd have to be insane to think that you can, unless you absolutely wipe out all of your enemy, you at some point have to sit down and talk and agree to find a way to a peaceful resolution. And it's always it's an everlasting shame of humanity that sadly thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of people die, and there's much bloodshed before sometimes deeply animus. Sorry, deeply countries with deep animosity to each other get to a point that they can actually kind of agree that. And I don't know kind of what the end game, but if the alternative of doing this, let's face it, it's an awful thing. It's not a good thing. It's not a. I don't like the kind of the champion, the cheering and the hooping and the wallering and the fist pumping kind of coming from the Americans. That just seems really kind of crass and awful, because people are going to be dying, and just to be kind of fist pumping the air or effectively kind of doing those sorts of things, it just seems really ghastly. But if the alternative is allowing an enemy that is sworn to eradicate you to have a nuclear weapon, then you kick the can down the road of, I do something now so that I put off the day where they actually get that weapon.
Yes,
because that's the point where it can't cross.
Yeah.
And on Iran's side, weirdly enough, in Ukraine, you're seeing a demonstration of actually what happens to countries who don't have nuclear weapons or sign away their rights to have their nuclear weapons. Because in Ukraine's case, one of the 6 countries that swore to protect their sovereignty and convinced them to give up their nuclear weapons is the one that bloody invaded them.
Yes, yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? And I guess
it's all shit.
It is. There is no easy answers, but I guess if the ultimate end of this would be that the Iranian people get their country back, and the religious zealots that seized control are in some way deposed, then I think the world would ultimately be a better place. But you seldom get regime change by dropping bombs, even if they are extraordinarily clever and very, very devastating bombs, which
bloodless coups are like hen's teeth, and rocking horse poo. They're as much as there are lots of countries that would be quite happy for Iran no longer to be the type of theocracy that it is, and for its people to have a better, safer, and a brighter future. The truth is that, not being funny, you don't have to look far back in our history books to kind of see what's happened in their country over the last 70 years because America and the UK meddled with with who was running their country.
Yeah, and we see that all across the world, don't we? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. All the time that the Taliban were attacking Russia, the Taliban were good folk. They were our friends and allies until they started attacking us, and then they no longer were. So I think that's as much as we can do on the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Where should we go next? Should we go disability benefit cuts?
Yeah, let's go for welfare reform. So my quick kind of précis on that one was that it was a green paper introduced and draft bill in March this year that basically puts into place that from November 2026, new PIP rules come into effect in 26, 27, and universal credit health top up will be halved for new claimants, and standard universal credit allowance starts rising, and effectively by 2028 the welfare capability assessment will be abolished, and therefore the PIP will be the sole health eligibility test. There's lots of kind of quick sums in the information. It talks about total welfare spending for I think it was 25 is projected to be 313 billion, of which over 55% is pensioner benefits, with working age and child welfare benefits being 141 billion, and disability and health related benefits are 75 billion of those. It's really interesting how they've quoted those, because they don't add up to the 100%. They kind of seem to have subdivisions of, but they've not made that clear in how they kind of made the numbers. So it's not just the fact that we're numerically illiterate. It's the fact that weirdly in the government statistics, they're not actually kind of presented in a clear way. But it's about 10% of GDP or 23.8% of government spending. So away you go.
Big numbers, but obviously, as we learned when
a billion here, a billion there, before long we'll start talking real money.
Well, but I guess, when we look at over half of it being kind of age related, pensions, we've seen how lively that gets when the government suggests making a cut there with the winter fuel allowance. So that's kind of not going to happen. So let's focus on PIP. So again, for anyone who's relatively new to the podcast, I am blind, so I have lived experience of PIP and am a PIP claimant myself. So PIP is an in-work benefit. So whether you are working or not, you are entitled to PIP if you are assessed as your disability impacting you, and the money is intended to help with the additional costs of disability. So that might involve getting somebody into help. It might involve with transport costs, buying equipment. Wheelchairs are horrendously expensive. So that is the kind of logic behind PIP, and I think most people would agree that kind of makes sense. That there is that payment. I mean, there is always the argument about whether it should be a means tested benefit or not, which is, again, there is no suggestion at the moment that they are going to means test it, but that would have been an avenue that it wouldn't have surprised me if they would have opened up. But I think when we look at this, Simon, there is a little bit of history, which is why the government is now in trouble. So if we go back about 6-7 years, might be longer, because let's go back perhaps about 10 years ago, there used to be the same benefit was called disability living allowance. And it used what's described as the medical model of disability. So if you turned up with your certificate from your ophthalmologist that said, I am blind, or you turned up with your certificate from your specialist saying, I am a wheelchair user, they looked at the certificate, they looked at you, they ticked the form, and they said, there you go, job done. That all sounds relatively straightforward, doesn't it?
Yeah, sounds kind of simple there and then. Simple kind of assessment. There we go. You're going to tell me, no, that doesn't. That's
no.
Okay.
So they then moved towards more of what's called the social model of disability. So you now have this long questionnaire, which you have to answer a series of intrusive questions about your personal well-being, self-care, being ability to produce yourself a meal, and how your disability impacts you. Okay. So this means, sorry.
No, sorry, go on.
So this means that in terms of eligibility for PIP, it is no longer black and white. So when we look at different hidden disabilities, such as anxiety, neurodiversity, some kinds of neuroskeletal conditions, if you answer the form in a positive, I make the best of it, I can do this, I this is hard, but I manage, you get no pounds and no pence, even if you are obviously medically disabled. But if you answer the question that says, it's all too much for me, and I can't get out of my bed in the morning, and my condition disables me, you get the benefit. So what the government has seen
Mm-hmm.
is an exponential increase. I think the number's about 40. I think the growth in the under 45s for people claiming PIP is almost entirely neurological and anxiety, depression based growth. And it is growing like topsy. And so the reforms that they're bringing in are suggesting that you have to be, quote unquote, more disabled to qualify.
Yeah, and a lot of this kind of seemed to, and I'm right in thinking that a lot of this increase occurred kind of around the pandemic, and has basically
Yes.
just kind of, rather than kind of that being a blip and then kind of reverting back to the mean, it's actually just it carried on that trajectory of that increasing amount. Is that essentially what the government is saying is
yes.
happening?
Yeah. So what they're seeing is they're saying that there is
Mm.
an exponential growth in in kind of people claiming PIP, and there is this piece where, from a government perspective, it's where they've got this challenge, which is that the increase of people who are identifying as disabled. And when I'm saying this, I don't want to create this league table of disability. You know, blind people have it harder than deaf people have it harder than people who use wheelchairs, etc., etc. That's not the way it is. And people who have, severe anxiety, and that it is an incredibly disabling condition. The challenge that the government has is that as we become more aware of mental health and we talk about it more and we perhaps are more understanding, and I guess, when I look at, neurodivergence now, and, when I was at school, there are a couple of examples of, kids I went to school and college with who were extremely, obviously fully along the autistic spectrum and had all of those things. They were just considered to be, quote unquote, a bit weird 40 years ago. Whereas now, we have a label. But I think from a government perspective, their real challenge is, how do you ensure that you target the money to those people who need it? How do you ensure that somebody who, if they believe they are disabled, then by default they become self-disabling? And how does a sensitive and caring society help that person back out of that position to be whatever the politically correct term is for fully contributing, living the life they choose, etc., etc., without it sounding like some kind of slight on people who are experiencing mental health episodes? And we go back to the old 70s style. Well, they just need to grow a pair. They need to man up. Get kind of, come on, stop. Get over yourself, stiff upper lip, and all that. So I think the government is in a hugely difficult position on this one.
I mean, they clearly are, because at the end of the day, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that you can't continue to have exponential rise in welfare costs, um, because we don't actually have an endless amount of money available, and there are other things that also want to have continual exponential rises in the amount of money that's spent on them. And if the economy, we're going to go down a Liz Truss rabbit hole in a minute if we're not careful. Unless you kind of keep growing the pie, there isn't more pie to actually kind of dish out to all of the things we want to spend them on. I just think,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think some of the language around this, and I'm not saying in our conversation, I'm saying in some of the places you kind of see this you see this discussed. It kind of it talks about these bloody late, effectively kind of accusing people of being lazy or
Yeah.
swinging the
Oh,
lead,
yeah.
or why do I have to go to work for a living when the person across the street never opens their fucking curtains? Sorry, I have to bleep that out. All of those kind of sorts of things where it's I don't know.
and
Yes, there's possibly a very, very small minority of well, actually, no, there is data that shows that there's an infinitesimally small number of people that are basically taking advantage of the situation. But most people may simply not be able to see a way out of the situation that they're in, and see a way to them being able to actually to use the phrase, kind of actually hold down a job and to be productive in that way. I don't know. I can't honestly believe that someone really wants to sit at home all day when they could be, doing something, even if they can't work full time, but they can actually kind of contribute in some way, because everybody knows that it's, getting out, meeting people, being somewhere else, doing something that feels valuable and worthwhile makes you feel good, and is actually good for your mental health. I just think
yes.
you before you can start cutting the amount of money you spend on just supporting people to quote unquote stay where they are, you first kind of need to spend money on helping them remove or address or mitigate the things that are blocking them actually re-entering or retaining a job in the workplace. And that might be difficult because some employers might struggle to be able to deal with people, for example, that have conditions that mean that their ability to work it isn't kind of constant and dependable. They might have days where actually look they can kind of work fine, but also days where they literally can't get out of bed. So there'll be
And
all sorts of situations where that happens. But do you also need to kind of invest money and support in helping employers support staff into those
yeah.
roles and keeping them?
Well, and this is undoubtedly the challenge that exists, because there is the access to work scheme, which the government is looking to cut simultaneously. So there is a scheme which pays for reasonable adjustments in the workplace, so that the employer who takes on a new member of staff, doesn't then have to pay hundreds, if not thousands, of making reasonable adjustments in the workplace to accommodate that person. I think the challenge with it is it is that element of there was the number of people who need that help is increasing exponentially. As a stat, if we look at children now who are considered in the SEND category of having special educational needs or disabilities, that was 9% of children in 2019, and in 2024 it was over 18. So the number of children who have special educational needs and disabilities has doubled, or the children identified as having those needs have doubled. Now, the challenge, as you say, that any government faces is that it is that with that increasing, how do you ensure that the people who are the most disabled and in need get that money, and the people for whom it's such a difficult language to use, it is a lifestyle choice, or it is a belief that they have now hold that they cannot. How do you deal with that sensitively and not impact the people who are in genuine need? Because we've all seen it. We talked about the workplace capability assessment. We have all seen the stories of, somebody suffering from terminal cancer who goes through one of those. The assessor tells them that they're fit to work, and frankly, they're not entitled to any more benefits, and they're dead within a week. We've all seen those stories, and of course, they will be the fraction of 1%. But it is that piece of, unless you take something like this entirely on trust, you have to have an assessment process that draws red lines and says, if you are this side of the line, you get the benefit. And if you're not, it's the other. And I guarantee you that whatever solution they come up with, I think this one's going to run and run. And I think politically, I don't think the majority of Labour voters and or Labour MPs are going to feel comfortable about money saving, quote unquote, being taken from the hands of the sick and the disabled. I think this is a story that's going to run and run, Simon. And I do have sympathy because I don't think there are any easy answers.
No, well, I think you're absolutely right there. There are not any easy answers on this one. It's actually very easy to write headlines about it, as certain media outlets do. But the truth is, if you want to be fair and humane and make sure that there is a safety net and there is support for people that genuinely need it, then you can't make those kind of sweeping catch-all kind of decisions. And I think somewhere there needs to, someone in the government needs to be honest and say, actually, this isn't easy to fix, because people are complex and the problems that they have are complex. But just because someone's life is complex and they have certain additional needs or certain requirements, that doesn't mean that they can't do some form of work or contribute in some sort of way. Yeah. And it is cruel in a way to just leave them to it, to leave them to their life and not actually provide them with that opportunity and that situation. Yeah. But you've got to do that in a way that isn't forcing people to go and do jobs that they actually, that they can't. I feel that there's got to be something that people can do, even if at the moment the situation that they're facing, they absolutely feel that it's impossible for them to do something. With the right support, most people will be able to.
Yeah, and it's always that thing about when the safety net becomes a hammock, isn't it?
Mm.
And it's that piece where when we look and we've stayed away from universal basic income, because when you look at what is a humane level of benefits, if the humane level of benefits, if you look at kind of the employment support allowance, PIP, and then you put on top, housing costs. And if you're a couple, then when you look at those, with housing costs as they are at the moment, when you look at that as a total package, that is what you get as a set of benefits. If you both go to work on the living wage, you will not be picking up much more than you pick up. Your life is yours to do as you own, as you wish. And like you, I would much rather see people being active in work, all of those good things. But yeah, it is going to be a dilemma, and I guarantee they're going to get it wrong one way or the other. So let's watch this space.
Okay. Indeed.
And our final in this cheery episode of the big ticket items, I hadn't actually worked out just how kind of, oh God, the three topics were, but hopefully we brought as much light and brevity as we can to the topics. What's our final one, Simon?
Well, the final one was the government deciding to U-turn on its and it's previously stated policy not to hold another inquiry into the grooming gangs. So this month, Baroness Casey's national audit that had been commissioned in 2025, in January this year, pointed to deep institutional failure and lack of ethnicity data in 2/3 of cases, widespread obfuscation around offenders' backgrounds, failures in data collection. And Casey herself had actually previously been against the idea of a new inquiry because previous inquiries had existed and the outcomes of those inquiries hadn't actually been enacted.
Yep.
So she'd previously been against it, but has concluded that the systemic failures warranted a full and statutory inquiry. So that's one with a judge-led panel that actually has legal powers to compel testimony and documents. So it's not would you mind actually just coming before us and answering some questions if you don't mind, old chap? No, it's a full force of the law. But there've been. There was a Rotherham report back in 2014 from Professor Alexis J. Revealing institutional failings. There were further reviews between 2015 and 2018, highlighting widespread abuse and failures of both police and of councils. In 2019, the Boris Johnson government promises tougher action. In 2020, the Home Office review finds no clear ethnic patterns among offenders, sparking criticism. It had downplayed the issues. In 2022, Alexis J proposes a new national inquiry, but the government rejects the idea, arguing local inquiries are enough. Remember, that's 2022, and the government didn't change till 2024. 23, 24, the Keir Starmer and Labour position, they were arguing a statutory inquiry would delay justice and duplicate existing efforts. But with the production of this review, they've changed their minds and decided that after this report from Baroness Casey, and it's fair to say that there's been lots of media attention around it through through the spring, with Sarah Champion and Lisa Nandy basically breaking ranks in Labour to call for an inquiry. So the terms of reference of the new inquiry are going to get published in between July and December this year, with survivor evidence collection beginning in next year. There's kind of several elements to this, isn't there? And I'm kind of struck by, we've had several actually thorough and in-depth inquiries, not a national inquiry, but we've had several inquiries before. And I'm kind of always struck by all of these inquiries that we have that don't have the legal power to insist that the government actually enforces or enacts the conclusions of those inquiries. It kind of if I'm honest, it makes me ask, what's the bloody point in having an inquiry if you're just going to put the report in a drawer and ignore it? I don't kind of get the logic of that. So on one hand, there is information that's been available for over 10 years that could have, action that could have been taken that hasn't, by the government of the, if that was 2014, of the government at the time, and successive kind of issues that were pointing to that. So it also then seems really, really distasteful for then the political point scoring to be kind of used of, this is some victory, we've achieved this. Well, why, if it was such an important victory, why didn't you do something when you were in government? And I think rather than celebrating a victory, there's the victims here that have been thoroughly let down, that haven't had I should imagine, I wouldn't begin to put my place in the shoes of a victim, but surely if you or a family member has experienced some sort of systemic or societal wrong, criminal acts, then you'd want the perpetrators to face justice, and you'd want to make sure that it doesn't happen to someone else again.
Well, I think that's the key. That's the key point, isn't it, Simon? It's that element of, lessons will be learned. Well, lessons are only learned if you listen to them and you do something with them. And I think when we look at this topic, that there is a distastefulness about the crowing of the U-turn, because there is this element of it is a sordid and uncomfortable spectacle that the previous government kicked the can down the street. And it's interesting that the current inquiry that has literally just burst forward says that there isn't enough ethnicity data to prove or disprove something. Whereas the report, and I can't remember, there was a 2018, 2019, the report said, oh yeah, there's no ethnic element to this. So the challenge where we're at now is, and let's not avoid the elephant in the room, the likes of Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, and his kind have been crowing about this for years and making all kinds of false equivalents that, about people of South Asian origin and of the Islamic faith, and effectively all the perpetrators being kind of in that social demographic. So there is this element of there have been people for whom they've been desperate for this racially divisive element to be true, and it's the piece where nobody has dealt with it well. I think. How do I feel about a national inquiry? I feel like you. There's a bit of me that says, well, what's it going to tell you that you don't already know? And when it tells you, what are you going to do with that information based on the evidence that seems to suggest nobody's enacted the learnings from the previous inquiries?
Yeah, and I just can't help but feeling that whatever the crime is and whoever the perpetrators are, surely we owe it to investigate that and to take reasonable steps to
Yep.
bring the perpetrators to justice and to stop those failures actually happening again, to stop it happening um to more young girls. And let's face it, the victims are
Yeah.
predominantly young girls, um and by not taking it seriously and by not doing something about it, unfortunately, it's given fuel to the fire to the likes of Yaxley Lennon and others that would quite happily make political hay of it. I'm just
And
like, I
uh,
just
uh,
can we just do
uh,
something that actually
yeah.
addresses the bloody problem, please? Can we do
Well,
something that actually is justice, that isn't political point scoring, that isn't dodgy Facebook posts, that isn't shady accusations put out along about social media that that turn into destruction of property, or put people's lives at risk. Let's actually do what our society should be doing, which is protecting its young people
yeah.
and protecting the wider society. Of just do your bloody job. Just
And
investigate it.
and
And the shame is, I forget his name. There was this guy who pretty much was hounded out of his position because he just wouldn't give up on the fact that he was seeing something, and the data isn't conclusive enough to say that that's a national trend or whatever. But you can't say there isn't a thing and there isn't a problem unless you go looking for evidence and then make your conclusion as to what the answer is. It's
and,
again
and
like our first thing. It's like, well, if we don't look hard enough, we won't find a difficult problem that we have to deal with.
definitely, and I think that's where that's where the unanswered question, isn't it? Is that what were several of these gangs allowed to act and allowed to perpetuate their activity because the institutions of the police and the council and social services were frightened to call them out, because for certain gangs they were of the South Asian Islamic community, and that it's that was there an institutional fear that allowed those horrific crimes to perpetuate. And I'm torn between the fact that that can only be investigated at a local level, because it will be people, and it will be people who made those decisions. And there is a part of me that says, well, if it's done at that local level, people shouldn't be allowed to mark their own homework. So I guess my profound hope, having the government having made its decision, is that I think, like you, that this isn't just another 2 years of reopening trauma
Hmm.
to, as you say, open a desk drawer and slam
Yeah, if we're
the
having a
report
statutory
in.
inquiry that compels people to provide evidence, then can it also be part of the terms of reference of that inquiry that the government are required to enact its
Yeah,
recommendations?
yeah. Let's compel them to act. So on that closing note, we've covered some ground this evening. I wouldn't say they've been the jolliest topics, but sometimes the world is not a happy place. We will do our utmost to continue to bring you the stories that matter. And as we've said before, we do requests. Thank you to everybody who's kind of listened along or listened this evening, or listened to it on your favorite podcast platform provider. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Do make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Facebook or sign up to our newsletter so you can get details of up and coming shows. And you can do that from our website, which is ppodcast.uk/newsletter. The link is in the comments. But thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.